We are now joined by Alexander Rodnyansky. He's the presidential advisor to Vladimir Zelensky and an assistant professor at the University of Cambridge, and he joins us now live from the Ukrainian capital, Kiev. It's a pleasure having you on the program today, sir. Now,
thank you for having me.
We heard from our defense analysts about the movements happening across Ukraine by the army there, but I want to hear firsthand from you on the progress that Ukraine has made in its counteroffensive, particularly in the annexed regions.
Yes, well, the progress is good. It's very clearly pronounced. In the last 5 or 6 days or so, we've captured around 400,000 square kilometers. You've seen that in the south, in the Kherson area. So that's a huge success. It's a very high pace of advance. Before that, we had already captured around 6,000 square kilometers. That's also in the north, to the east of Kharkiv. So we're going at a very high pace. We're recapturing lost territory. We're liberating our regions, our country, and that's what we're going to continue to do.
What's the government's plan when it comes to ensuring that Ukraine's borders aren't going to be re-identified with Russia wanting to take control of those 4 provinces in Ukraine?
Well, to be honest, I don't think that question makes a lot of sense. I mean, we could just pose that question for any country. What would Turkey do if Russia claimed to have annexed half of the country? I mean, that's what they're doing here. They've claimed to annex a lot of the regions that they don't even fully control. So, I mean, it's really meaningless. It might mean something to the Russians, but to us, it doesn't change anything. We're going to keep pressing forward, making sure that we recapture the territory that has been under occupation and liberate our people. And by the way, if you look at what happens to our people in those occupied areas, we see all sorts of evidence of torture, rape, abuse. So we can't even think about anything else other than liberating these areas. And that's what we're going to continue doing, no matter what the Russian government tries to portray or say in terms of whatever status they think these regions have.
To what extent has the weapons assistance to Ukraine helped in this counteroffensive? And does Zelensky expect his allies to provide more weapons? We did hear him speak in the meeting earlier in Prague, calling on the leaders there to provide Ukraine with more assistance.
Yes, absolutely. So military assistance is pivotal for us. It's highly important. We've been speaking about it throughout the whole conflict, especially at this point. What we need most is attack weapons. We need a lot of tanks. We need armored vehicles in order to protect our men who are exposed when they are trying to recapture the ground. We also need air defense, and that is made clear again by the attacks that we've just witnessed today. So Russia is using Iranian kamikaze drones to attack our cities. Those drones are flying at a very high pace, at a very long distance, and at a very low altitude. So they're hard to catch. And we need very modern and good air defense systems for that. So that just reiterates and underscores the type of machinery and equipment that we need. But I will also say, to be fair, that we have a lot of our own equipment that's been important and that we've used with great effectiveness to combat the Russians.
Right, and as I mentioned, members of the European Union and other countries in the region are currently meeting in Prague, speaking about the war in Ukraine. It's high on the agenda and the effects of this war in the region, one of it being the energy crisis that the bloc is currently dealing with. And the EU wants to be energy independent, but it's not. And it's still getting gas from Russia. How much of this money that Russia gets from its gas exports is used to fund this war? And what are your thoughts on the double standard of certain countries who support Ukraine, but at the same time continue to receive that gas from Russia?
Yes, well, the answer is actually very crisp and clear. Every additional dollar that the Russians are getting at this point, every marginal dollar, so to say, in economic parlance, is used for the war effort. So we need to make sure that we deprive Russia of these funds. They're clearly using those to fund the war. You could just use anecdotal evidence too. You can see at the type of monetary stimulus that they're trying to provide for their troops, the recruits that they're not getting easily in order to send them there and to incentivize them going into Ukraine. So long story short, of course, Russia is financing the war effort through its sales of energy to Europe primarily. Now, Europe has said very clearly that they're moving away from the dependence on Russian gas and oil. There's going to be an oil embargo by the end of the year. It hasn't happened as quickly as we've hoped, but that's already a step forward. Gas is more difficult, but we do believe our partners, especially in Germany and other big continental European countries, that they will move away, hopefully sooner rather than later, because it does make a difference, of course.
Right, and going back to February when this war first started, Putin said he doesn't want Ukraine to be a member of NATO, but Ukraine has now formally applied to become a member of NATO. Do you think that the alliance will accept your country's application and that they would risk being at direct confrontation with Russia?
Yes, well, look, just to remind everyone, at the beginning of the full-scale invasion, our president was very clear. We were trying to negotiate with the Russians in order to stop the war by any means possible. And we said, look, we're happy to consider the possible compromise solution where we're going to remain neutral and we're not going to be seeking a NATO accession, right? And what did the Russians do? Deceive, lie, and trick us all around in order to proceed with their full-scale invasion. So they had no interest whatsoever throughout these months in any sort of peace deal or negotiations. Now, when the Russians finally reached the pinnacle of this whole process by annexing or claiming to have annexed part of our country, there's really no more scope for any type of settlement or negotiation with the current Russian regime. So we said at this point very clearly that we will negotiate with Russia at some point, but it's going to have to be with a new president, with a new regime, after the collapse of the present regime. Now, we will seek, as a response to what's going on, NATO accession. Whether it's going to happen overnight, that's unlikely, but we do have the full support of many NATO countries already, and so in terms of our accession. And so we'll see what happens.
All right, the presidential advisor to Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky and assistant professor at the University of Cambridge, Alexander Rodnyansky. Thank you so much for joining us here on the NewsHour and sharing that information with us.